America has always shined from being at the top for great living conditions. Since the foundation of our country started, society has always been building itself up with the huge job creation, advanced technology, and population growth. We as American citizens are able to drive decent cars, live in multiple story houses, add extra entertainment inside and outside of our homes, and live comfortable lives. America has always been a place to live your dream and have a life you've always wanted. America hasn't always been like this though. Farming was a common way of living in America, from the day it was found all the way to present time. It is a way to put food on the table and make money for a decent living. Aside from farming, the business industry has grown since the Industrial Revolution, leading to more jobs available to Americans. All these ingredients mixed together has baked what is now present-day America. America wasn't always like this though. The country went through a terrible stretch of history called the Great Depression. October 29th, 1929 was the start of chaos. The stock market crashed, sending the entire U.S. economy into a downward spiral. Banks failed, businesses shut down, and many families became homeless. Countless lives were lost due to disease, starvation, drugs, and suicide. Families were torn apart for many years, and the government was blamed by many Americans. Shanty towns were named Hoovervilles, after the unpopular president at the time, Herbert Hoover. One person's life that was directly affected by the Depression was Blake Dalton. Blake Dalton was a hard-working American, like everyone else. He worked 8 to 12-hour days in a factory. It was not always the safest and most fun job to work at, but he was able to put food on the dinner table for his family and pay the bills. He was happily married to his wife, Maria, and they had 2 children named Jansen and Martha, who were both 7 years old and loved going to school to learn. The Daltons lived in a decent-sized house with a full kitchen, living room, and a couple bedrooms. They just enjoyed living comfortably every day without any kind of worry. That all changed when the Depression struck the country. Blake was working at the factory on an average Thursday when his boss approached everyone on the floor and demanded a meeting. He gathered all of his employees and told them the life-changing news. "You're all out of jobs," he said with a deep tone in his voice. Blake came home that night and revealed the devastating news to his family at the dinner table. He was shaken up, just like everyone else who lost their jobs. "What's going to happen to us now, Daddy?" asked Martha with a sad tone in her voice. "I'm not sure, sweetie. We'll figure something out," said Blake with a little bit of hesitation. Weeks went by without any kind of income coming into the house. The Daltons were able to feed themselves with little food that was only obtained by selling a lot of items in their home. The kids were not taking the Depression well, as they stopped attending school, forcing them to stay at home and finding something else to do with their time. Blake was taking the situation the hardest. He became addicted to alcohol while being laid off from his job. This caused him to become someone he was not. He became more angry and violent around his family. He would sometimes sneak out of the house and hunt for some liquor to share with someone or steal it completely. One evening, the adults were just trying to pass the time in the living room. Maria was sitting in the rocking chair knitting a sweater, and the kids were coloring some pages in an old coloring book they found in their closet. Blake stumbled into the room, reeking of alcohol. He began slurring his words really loud and attracting everyone's attention. Maria got up and approached Blake with an angry expression on her face. "Where were you?" she asked Blake. She answered her own question by saying, "You were out stealing some of this." Maria took the bottle from his hands, causing Blake to stumble. Blake's face turned vicious, and he walked over to the kitchen. Blake opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out a sharp knife. He pointed it towards Maria, who was standing at the door, and she began to scream loudly. Kids dropped their crayons and ran over to their mom, hugging their legs. "You think this is funny? You think this is some sort of game? Well, it's not," said Blake with a crazy voice. The kids looked at their mom with tears in their eyes. They did not recognize their father anymore. He was formed into something that he was not. Blake swung the knife in his family's direction, causing his wife to scream and bolt out of the house with their kids right beside her. Blake looked at the knife and immediately dropped it to the floor along with himself. Tears were flowing down his face. Blake's family did not return to the house for days. Blake faced the fact that they were not coming home. He prepared himself for another act of criminal activity. He left the house and arrived at a local grocery store that was still doing pretty well during the Depression.
He attempted to steal as many groceries as he could carry before being stopped by the clerk. Blake pulled out his knife and threatened to harm him. Before he could cause any harm, he was stopped by the cop who was working security at the market. The guard pulled his gun out and threatened to pull the trigger on Blake. With tears starting to fall on the floor, Blake dropped the knife and put his hands over his head. The security guard cuffed Blake and pulled him outside to wait for the local police to throw him in jail. Blake was sentenced to prison where he was able to think about what he had done. Blake and his family never met up again, as Blake died while in prison from a heart attack. His family received the news, but returned to live their lives normally. The Depression affected many people during its course in history. Definitely a time for most Americans, but we still look back on it and remind ourselves that America's state isn't always the brightest.